Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. So this week, I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a shorter solo episode, just because so many of the news topics that were happening felt like, I don't know, beating a dead horse in a lot of ways. But luckily, there was a lot that happened outside of my beating a dead horse topic, so enough to make an episode, but it'll probably be shorter. On the personal front, I spent the last 2 weeks, I think I mentioned in my last solo episode that my mom had to have unexpected surgery. I worked remotely for those 2 weeks because I do not qualify for FMLA at my job, but they allowed me to work remotely for 2 weeks, which gave me a lot of time to squeeze in recording some guest episodes. So I've been doing that for the last couple weeks, and there's some really exciting ones coming, which I'm so excited for everybody to hear. I've been bringing, I think this episode will come out the first week of August, Sam Smeaton, who is the public school teacher from Texas that I had on last summer or fall, early fall maybe. He's coming back on to talk about the Texas public school fiasco that's going on down there. And then a couple of other awesome guest episodes. Next week will be a America 250th special with some amazing authors. And that's about it. The only thing I want to put on anybody's radar is that due to the war in Iran, my trip in March got canceled because I was supposed to go to Dubai, and then due to my mom's surgery, another trip got canceled. So now between September, like the 1st of September, and then like mid-October, I'm traveling for like 3.5 out of those 6 weeks. Actually, more like 4 out of those 6 weeks, which was not my original plan. That doesn't sound very fun to me, but here we are. And I'm hoping to have guest episodes recorded for some of those weeks, but solo episodes might be sparse. We will see as the time gets closer. But if I fall off a bit on the podcasting realm, that's why. Again, was not in my original plan, but here we are. This is the way the cookie has crumbled, and I am facing it with a smile. Smile on my face. Anyways, that's about it. So in this week's solo episode, we're going to get into a little bit about Iran just because that heated up a little bit. Some political sex scandals, per usual. Love those. Mitch McConnell, classic. Love that guy. The World Cup, and also Illinois' cool new law on AI safety, which, God bless J.B. Pritzker, so awesome and fun. But that is kind of what I'm thinking for this week. Again, I don't want to say not a lot has happened, but like so much of it was just like, again, beating a dead horse, like stories that I've covered over and over again, which Iran is one of them, but like I thought that horse had been beat to death, and somehow the horse came to life again. Like Jesus Christ on the third day, resurrected. I am also recording this a little bit later than usual, which was my bad. I've had a busy week, and I just didn't have a lot of time in the evenings after work to record, but this is being recorded on Saturday the 11th at about 2 p.m. Central Time. So anything that happens between now and Monday when this comes out, not my business. And that's about it. I'm also recording this. I went to the pool this morning and came back. And so if you've seen clips, I'm literally, you can see it, wearing a bathing suit top with a dress over it. I look like those 2000s, like, where people would wear double cami tank tops. That's what I look like in the clips. Anyways, let's get into it. So if you've listened to any solo episode of mine for the last 4 months, there has almost always been an Iran update, because this conflict just refuses to leave the news cycle. Although I shouldn't say this conflict, I should say Donald Trump refuses to let this conflict leave the news cycle. So really great and awesome. So a couple weeks ago, well, actually, over the last, I don't know, probably a month, there's been a lot of back and forth, if you've been following, about getting a ceasefire signed. And we signed one, and it was shaky. And then Iran bombed some boats in the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. was like, so it went back and forth for a while. Then earlier this week, it just, I guess, completely ruptured is the best way to describe it. So Iran, I guess, performed a aggression, and Trump struck Iran again. And then when asked about it, Trump was like, well, I thought the ceasefire was over. Sir, what? Like, ceasefires work because both parties uphold them. So I'm not going to say like Iran did no wrong, but like if Iran hits a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, like, maybe your first reaction shouldn't be, I'm going to go back to just obliterating them. And maybe it should be, hey, let me call those people I negotiated with and see what the deal is. Because responding to aggression with aggression is not the way to solve a conflict, even like interpersonally. Like, if somebody comes at you aggressively, sure, maybe your instinct is to be aggressive back, but like that doesn't solve anything. So riddle me what that's about. Anyways, but I think this all stems from the fact that Iran now knows that they control the strait, essentially. You know, I think I mentioned it when the conflict first started, that any person worth 2 cents in national security would have said that Iran's first move was going to be to try to close the strait, which they haven't done before, but they now know they can do it successfully, and that if they do that, it has the potential to cripple the world economy. So I think they're just flexing that power right now, to be quite frank with you. I think Trump is pissed that he's let the cat out of the bag, but I don't think he's admitting that he is the one who let the cat out of the bag. So riddle me that. But I guess the ceasefire is over, question mark? Every time I give like an Iran update in a solo episode, I'm like, it always, first of all, any update I've ever given about Iran always changes within 24 hours. And then anything I said is basically moot by the time the episode comes out. So I expect much of the same here. There hasn't really been any movement, I think, after Trump was like, well, I thought the ceasefire was over, so I bombed them. Huh? Nothing's moved since then. And that was, I think, a couple days ago. So we'll see. We will see if that in fact holds, if the ceasefire comes back. You know, I guess if anything, this is a reminder that ceasefires they're not political agreements. They're not treaties. They require trust on both sides, which is in any ceasefire is tough. I mean, you think about like Ukraine and Russia, you think about Gaza and Israel, like it's hard to have trust on both sides. But they also rely on communication, which we know Trump is astoundingly bad at, and also restraint, which we also know Trump and also the Iranians are bad at. So all those things are in short supply. So I'm not that shocked that the ceasefire didn't hold, but here we are. Let's move on to what could be the hottest news story in Democratic politics this week. So if you've been living under a rock, there's a guy running for Senate in Maine, and his name is Graham Platner. He showed up on the scene as like a political outsider and was an oyster farmer and was kind of just had this vibe of like being this all-American guy, very masculine, you know, in the way that like Democrats were looking, because Republicans are so focused on like masculinity, Democrats were looking for candidates to like also be masculine. Like he was very, I don't know, I don't want to say forceful, although the news stories that have been coming out would say that he is quite forceful. Just very big and loud and a manly man, I guess is the best way to describe it. Well, and the reason that this Senate race like really came into the national spotlight is, one, because we need to defeat Susan Collins, because she's a Republican there. She's pretty independent. You know, she's voted against Trump a bunch of times, but Maine it's a quirky state. So like she fits Maine, I think, pretty perfectly in the same way that Lisa Murkowski of Alaska fits Alaska. It's a quirky state. Because we needed to defeat Susan Collins, the DSCC threw in Janet Mills. They were trying to recruit Janet Mills, who is the Maine governor and is like close to 80. They were like, you should run for Senate. You should run for Senate. And she eventually said yes, which when a 78, 79-year-old is running against a 40-year-old at a time when people want different, they want younger, they want new ideas, was not a good look. And that was evidenced by the fact that Janet Mills ended her campaign a couple months ago because she couldn't raise money. Now, Janet Mills enters the race and oppo starts to come out about Platner. First thing to come out, and I'm sure I'm just beating this into your heads because this was pretty big news that I think most people heard, but story comes out that Graham Platner has a Nazi tattoo. And he acknowledged it, said, I got it when I was drunk and in the army, and I've now covered it up. And that was kind of that. There's a lot of people at this point that say that like that should have been the disqualifying factor. which I agree. And we'll get to it a little bit later, but like people are like, especially when these new accusations came out this week and people were like, what makes you think people can't change? Da, 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 da. And I'm like, he had his opportunity to change with the Nazi tattoo allegation. You know, like making an oopsie is fine and acknowledging it, covering up the tattoo. Like people can look past that and say, great, thank you so much. You know, done and done. Like you still have my vote. However, one oopsie, I think, is all a major politician is afforded before it becomes a pattern of behavior. So anyways, Nazi tattoo incident happens. Then between Nazi tattoo and now, there was reports of his wife talking to a senior campaign staffer about how he was texting other women while he was married. There were the Reddit posts that were problematic and kind of victim blamed women for rape, had some other problematic statements in there, but that I think was the one that really stuck out to people given what came next. Then there was the first set of sexual assault allegations, which I think a lot of people dismissed because, and wrongly so, like nothing about this is correct. People dismissed them because the woman who said she was assaulted by Platner worked for, I believe it was the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing like think tank kind of thing. So people easily dismiss that as like, that's just people trying to get him down, like da 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 da. Then this week, and mind you, a couple weeks ago, Platner goes on like an apology tour to sitting senators, and it's like, no, the other shoe is not going to drop. Like, this is it. All my scandals are out in the air. This week, a woman who was mentioned in the first article comes out and says, he raped me. So that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, and everybody was like, what the hell? And now, at this point, Platner has dropped out of the race, and now the race is on to find a replacement for him by, I think, the Maine Democratic Party is until July 27th. So now we'll see what they can scrounge together. I will say that the discourse around Graham Platner was very alarming. I think back to Eric Swalwell, and when his accusations came out, like, again, the floodgates opened. Like, nobody was supporting him, and he puts out this video, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And Graham Platner essentially does the same thing. And I had made a video where I was like, okay, just like Eric Swalwell, Graham Platner can't read the room. Like, nobody's standing with you now. Boy, was I proven wrong, because the comments were like, no evidence, who's paying you, which, mind you, I just got over that. I just got over people telling me that I was being paid. Anyways, that one hit close to home. Who's paying me? People were defending him, saying there's no evidence. People were getting the two women confused. And I'm like, that's already a problem because you're talking about a totally different story. Whatever. So there were, shockingly, a lot of people that were still willing and able to defend Platner. And I think that speaks to just how much he spoke to change and to new leadership. But that's alarming. That's very, very alarming. And I understand Swalwell was more establishment, but like, if we're all going to abandon Swalwell because he was accused credibly of assault, we need to do the same thing with Platner. So it was, I don't know, I just found it very odd that people were so quick to defend Platner, despite the fact that this is his, fifth or sixth oopsie daisy moment. Like, again, at a certain point, if there's smoke, there's fire. And a lot of people were like, oh, innocent until proven guilty. That is the rule in the court of law. That is not the rule for me to make an opinion or calling on somebody to step down from office. I feel horrible for all the women involved. I can't even imagine what it is like to watch the person that assaulted you launch a campaign that is recognized on the national level. Like, I can't even fathom what you would be feeling at that point. I feel bad for everybody that, I don't want to say tricked, but for everybody that believed in him and thought he was this new leadership that they were looking for, which, you know, without everything else about him, he was a good speaker. He was great at rallying people around him. It's just unfortunate that he's a shitty person and also potentially a rapist. I will also say that there were so many, listen, this is going to open the door for so many people to play points and say, well, I didn't like him after the Nazi tattoo thing. I didn't like him after the Reddit post. I've said this in other episodes, think if you don't live in Maine that you should kind of leave elections alone. And that was another comment on my video. It was like, I hate when white women that aren't working class try to comment on a race and they don't even live in Maine. I agree. I really try not to comment on races that, like, I don't have the lived experience on the ground there, and I don't know anything about Maine. However, if a person running for office is accused of sexual assault, of rape, I think that calls for everybody, no matter where they live, to call on that person to step down at literally anything. Like, I think that transcends state borders. But anyways, I think this opens up the door for, like, people keeping score of, like, well, I didn't like him after the Reddit post. I didn't like him after, whatever other scandal he had. And I just think that there are, at this point, a lot of people willing to look past mistakes, especially if people show some sort of remorse, in order to get the change that they so desperately want. And I think that's what the case of Graham Platner was. People were willing to overlook the tattoo. People were willing to overlook the Reddit posts because he's a changed person. He's now speaking about these things and in a populist message and whatever. People are so hungry for change that they are willing to overlook flaws like that. And I think even despite the tattoo, despite the Reddit posts, he was a better candidate than Janet Mills. Period. And I think voters saw that. And I said as much in a Substack post that I wrote, but like, I'm not going to delete it, but I read it back and I'm like, oh God, no. But I think he was a better candidate than Janet Mills. And I think people flocking to him was in response to the fact that Janet Mills was handpicked and hand-pushed by the DSCC. Granted, Platner was also somebody that was propped up by other people. But anyways, that's that on that. Gab, I think, I have to pick a candidate soon, but we'll gab about who the new person is, hopefully in the next solo episode. It's going to be tough. I don't think there's another candidate like Platner that is easily like a one-for-one swap. Someone I know did get a fundraising text from Gordon Wood, who lives in Maine, ran in a congressional district and lost the primary. And that to me shows that he is like anti-PAC money, anti-APAC money. Like, he seems fine, but like, if he's already sending texts to out-of-state donors, that makes me feel like is being kind of pushed by some sort of like insider group. I don't know. I'm just speculating at this point, but we'll see. Let's talk about everyone's favorite senator, Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell is the senator of Kentucky. He was the Senate Majority Leader for a long time. He did not vote to convict Donald Trump in the second impeachment because he was like, he's not the president anymore. He's been representing Kentucky for a bajillion and 1 years. A couple years ago, he was doing a press conference and like froze up on camera. Like, he's elderly. Let's start there. In mid-June, he was rushed from his apartment, condo, wherever the hell he lives, in DC, to the hospital and was hospitalized. As time has gone on, more and more details have started to come out, like the fact that he was found unresponsive and received CPR in the field before he was taken to the hospital, and the fact that he was taken out of his house on a stretcher. The 911 audio was released. Like, it's not looking good for Mitch. Speculation is kind of thinking that he went into cardiac arrest and he's being kept alive with a vent or on life support and ultimately will not make a full recovery. And that's a problem because he's still receiving his paycheck, which is so awesome. And also, Kentuckians are now left with no representation, which is like super not cool and not okay. Now, I will say that the tweets and posts and threads about Mitch McConnell being like virtually incapacitated, they got a good laugh out of me. My favorite one was during the heat wave last week. Somebody was like, we're in this heat wave because the gates of hell have opened to receive Mitch McConnell. Don't get me wrong. He's a human being. However, he is fairly evil. So do I pity him? No. Do I feel bad for his family? Sure. But I mostly feel bad for the Kentucky residents that, again, have no representation. They're having no insight into what he's doing. His wife went to China and released a statement, I think it was yesterday, that was like, his health didn't warrant me to stay there. So nobody's heard from him. And now all of a sudden, I think maybe it was Tuesday or Wednesday, it was in the middle of this week, Republican members of Congress and the Senate and talking heads were like, I spoke to Mitch McConnell for 20 minutes today. Are you sure? Are you sure it wasn't through a Ouija board? Very bizarre. There's no resolution to this because we still have not heard any update on when he's going to return to work, what actually happened to him that caused him to be in the hospital. We have nothing. We have no information besides the released call and what Republican talking heads are saying that they talked to him about. Now, again, I think the biggest issue is the fact that Kentuckians virtually have no representation at this point, and I think they're trying to keep him alive and in office until after the time window when a special election cannot be called, and I think that's August 3rd, I believe. So we'll see. It feels a little bit like poetic justice in a certain way. He's where he deserves to be, quite honestly. He has done some very evil things in his lifetime, packing the courts with conservative justices, ensuring that Obama did not get to nominate a Supreme Court justice is another one, not voting to convict Trump during his second impeachment. He has fundamentally reshaped this country for the worst, not for the better. So do it that way you will. Hopefully, in the next solo episode, I'll have more information to give you, but that's the story for now. Moving on to the World Cup. So if you live under a rock, World Cup has been going on in the US, Mexico, and Canada for the past few weeks. The US men's team, which historically does not have good or long runs in the World Cup, made it fairly far. But in their second to last game, one of the players got a red card, which listen, I'm not a sports person. I'm especially not a World Cup or soccer person. So feel free to send me an email and tell me if I'm describing this wrong. In soccer, if you get a red card, you are not allowed to play for the next game. The person on the US team who got the red card is one of our best scorers. Point getter, if you will. Now, that's a problem. That's a problem when you're making it pretty far and your top point getter is, on the bench. So it was a controversial red card, though. I will say that. It was split on whether the red card was warranted or not, whatever. Trump calls FIFA. He calls Big FIFA. And he says, I need you to get rid of that red card. And they did it. They got rid of the red card. They were like, you know what? Actually, he can play. He can play. Now, listen, do I think the red card should have been overturned? Yes. Do I think that should have been accomplished by the President of the United States calling Big FIFA? No. I can be both elated that the red card was overturned and pissed that it is the President of the United States that called Mr. FIFA and said, fix it. That's a problem. Why are we politically interfering in the World Cup? If the U.S. then went on to lose the game. If the U.S. had won that game, I don't think any win after that would have been considered quote-unquote legitimate, given the fact that there was some sort of political interference by Trump to get us there. So that is a thing, unfortunately. I don't really have much more to say on that because the U.S. did lose the game that Trump tried to get us to win, so it doesn't matter anymore. But I think it's important to also acknowledge the fact that FIFA gave him the FIFA Peace Prize. So Trump and Big FIFA, they're friends, they're buddies. So do with that what you will. And Trump just can't help himself from injecting himself in big sporting events. Trump and his administration, the Olympics just happened, inserted himself there. World Cup, granted, it's in our country, so I get the inserting a little bit, but he literally just cannot help himself. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is AI. Buzzword. I don't know how many of you guys follow me on Instagram versus just listen here, but last year, you know how they have Spotify Wrapped? Riverside, which is the software that I use to record my episodes did like a Riverside Wrapped for me. And it was like, this is the word you use the most. And the word was AI. And it put together a clip of every time me or a guest said AI over and over and over and over again, which I thought was really, really funny. Anyways, Illinois has become one of the first states to sign an AI regulation law into place, which is super awesome, especially considering that last year when the big beautiful bill was going to be voted on, they tried to sneak in a provision that said that states cannot regulate AI. I believe that provision got knocked out because J.B. Pritzker said, watch this. And the Illinois legislature created a bill that regulates AI. Now, I think this should become like the blueprint for other states, which is a lot of times how state laws work. Like you implement it in one state and then other states start to adopt it. Always sucks to be the first state to do something, but here we go. I think this definitely is something J.B. Pritzker will use in his run for 2028, which he hasn't announced yet, but is so obviously happening. So good for him. But essentially, it regulates large artificial intelligence developers, which adds new reporting requirements for risks caused by the AI models. It includes a first-in-the-nation requirement for annual independent third-party audits. Love that. It's based on bills out of California and New York, which tracks because California, New York, and Illinois account for roughly 40% of the AI market. So we are now the new national standard, which is cool, but before signing the bill, J.B. Pritzker did say that this is a direct quote, we can work together to establish thoughtful guardrails in ways that benefit both industry and the public, or we can allow a handful of actors to evade accountability and push the cost and detriment onto ordinary people. Illinois has chosen our path. So that's good news for us in Illinois, especially given, again, the AI data center boom. I think a few weeks ago, J.B. Pritzker stopped doing the tax cuts for data centers, which was super awesome. And here we are. So it seems like blue states are starting to make the moves to regulate AI. Granted, I mean, I don't want to say J.B. Pritzker is doing this for political points because I don't think he is. This legislation is very, very necessary given the times that we are in. But this is a huge boost to him and also a huge relief to those in Illinois that have been affected by data centers, affected negatively by AI. And this is not a solution, but absolutely a step in the right direction. And unfortunately, given the fact that people in Congress are being bought up by the AI industry, this is what AI governance looks like right now. I don't think we should expect, or I don't think we can expect, or even should expect in the next decade for any, I don't want to say decade, maybe 5 years. I don't think we should expect in the next 5 years to have any sort of federal AI regulation or guardrails. It's going to need to be done at the state level. So if you live in a state that is not Illinois, California, or New York, call your state reps, your state senators, and tell them to pass a similar law because it's not happening at the federal level. If you think the federal government is coming to save you on AI, I don't know what to tell you because it's not happening. Not happening. It is on the states at this point to experiment with different approaches, depending on what the sort of AI situation is in your state. But, as AI becomes increasingly integrated into things like hiring and healthcare, education, political campaigns, these rules that states put in place are going to become more and more important. And I say that as somebody whose workplace is actively pushing AI down our throats. So it's weird. I mean, I'd love to talk to other people that are having AI pushed by their companies. It feels weird. I don't know. I don't like to use AI very much, if at all. I'll use it. There's one instance at work where using AI is 10 times better than the shitty model that otherwise would be used. And that's the only time I'll open ChatGPT at work is to use that. But it's scary. People are losing their jobs. People are not making as much money as they could because of AI. So any sort of regulation that can be passed is, I think, good news. And like I said, it is scary to be the first and to try something new, but AI is evolving so fast that I think you need to put something. You need to have something in place, and then if the situation evolve the rules. That's how I think we need to be coming at this. Anyways, that is all I have for you guys this week. Like I said, little short, quick episode, and nothing too heavy, which is awesome. Nothing too abysmal. Yeah, I think that's it. Next week will be the America 250th episode with the authors of Divided Over the Declaration, which is a fantastic book that you should totally go read before you listen to the episode. And then we're off to the races. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and don't forget to make sure that your senator is not being kept alive by machines. I will see you guys next week.